Alright, so now we're on chapter 2 of the first of the Harry Potter's books. It's called The Vanishing Glass. That's the name of this chapter. So there's going to be a glass that vanishes at some point or something. I don't know. We come to find out that Harry is now living with his aunt and uncle in Bel Air. And we learn that his cousin is bad. And you know how we know that he's bad? It's because he's fat. The book is very clear that his fatness and his badness are sort of intertwined. And this kid is like a spoiled sociopath. His name is Dudley, and he gives Harry his old clothes, and the clothes are way too big for Harry because he's fat. And this is like this weird, back to this weird Calvinist ideology where there's the elect and the reprobate, and you were born this way. God marks the elect with a fucking lightning bolt on their forehead, and he marks the reprobate with grotesque physical features. This is, by the way, an incredibly destructive ideology for a whole host of reasons, not least of which is just the sort of subtle and charming way in which fat shaming gets totally normalized in this chapter. But we also come to learn that the reason that Dudley is fat and spoiled and terrible is that his parents are overindulgent. And so this is like a sort of critique of modern bourgeois excess, I think, or it's supposed to be, but it's really clunky. There's a sort of nurture over nature argument going on in the background, but I think that this is all really just to say, okay, here are the bad people that hate imagination and hate, mystery and all the cool shit that you're reading this book for, and Harry isn't that, and they all hate Harry, and so you feel sympathy for Harry, and that's the whole sort of breakdown. We also come to find that Harry is spending his days being mercilessly beaten by Dudley, but it's not that bad because he can run away from Dudley because Dudley's fat. And so the narrator just keeps hammering this point home to the point where it really gets bad. We also find that Harry is forced to sleep in a cupboard full of spiders. So that's really fucked up. And the aunt and the uncle tell Harry that the number one rule is don't ask questions, which is back in line with this, we hate imagination shit from chapter 1. And it's like, no one actually thinks like this. No one actually thinks like, don't ask questions. It's sort of like the narrator isn't good enough to sort of come up with a convincing ideological apparatus for this sort of thing. And so they just go with the most like blatantly obvious, like, well, we just don't like curiosity. There's also this really weird description where Dudley's mom thinks that he looked like he's looking like an old picture of Dudley as like a baby or something, and thinks that he looked like a baby angel, and Harry's like, no, he looks like a fat pig, he's a fat shitty pig. And it's like the weirdest thing to get us, sort of the cheapest way of getting us to agree with Harry and hate Dudley is to just like keep reinforcing that he's this like fat grotesque thing. And I have no idea why the narrator is belaboring this point, other than to just fat shame Dudley, and also to fat shame anyone else who happens to be reading this book. And then for some reason Uncle Vernon tells Harry, like, get a haircut, hippie, and we don't really understand why. And then Dudley throws a temper tantrum because he didn't get enough presents on his birthday, to which Harry reacts as this sort of Pavlovian fear that this dude is going to turn a table over. So like Harry is clearly has like some PTSD going on here. He's already sort of just like conditioned himself to expect Dudley to be horrible and violent. And then they are going to go, the parents are going to take old Dudley out for his birthday and leave Harry with someone named Mrs. Fig. And like for some reason Harry hates Mrs. Fig because she makes him look at pictures of her cats. And it's like, dude, you sleep on fucking spiders and this fucking kid beats you up all the time. Like, you are being abused mercilessly. Go look at cat pictures. What the fuck is wrong with you? Someone did that, like, someone was like, hey, you're gonna take a break from your horrible existence to go look at some adorable cat pictures? I'd be like, hell yeah. I think Harry's like, maybe this is like some sort of Stockholm Syndrome thing, I don't know, but it's also not, because the narrator wants to have it both ways. So then it turns out that Mrs. Fig broke her leg, and Harry's like, oh good, that awful woman who shows me adorable cat pictures, I'm so glad that violence has befallen her. It's really weird. I don't understand this at all. And then Harry, it's sort of this weird trope. So that Harry has to go out with the family to the zoo. That is where they're going, and we get this insane backstory narration about all the crazy shit that's always happening to Harry, and it's never his fault. One time, his aunt put him in solitary confinement because his hair grew back too fast. And then this other time, Harry told his uncle that he dreamed about a flying motorbike, and his uncle yelled at him, "Motorbikes don't fly." And Harry's like, "Yeah, dude, it's a dream. Do you not know what a dream is, you weird angry man? How did you get this far in life, where your entire existence is just to be like the most cartoonishly awful human being on the planet? How are you a real person?" And so they go to the zoo, and Harry sees a gorilla, and he's like, "Hey, Dudley, that's you, dude. You're that gorilla because you're big and fat like that gorilla." And then they go to this reptile house, and Dudley has this shitty friend named like Piers Morgan or something like that, and Dudley's shitty friend and him are like, "We want to see big fucking snakes. We want to see big old phallic symbols. We're the throbbing, engorged snakes. We are toxic masculinity." And then Dudley finds this big snake, but it's limp or like asleep or something. And then he tells his uncle, "Yo, get this snake up." And his uncle couldn't get the snake up, and so Dudley gets bored. And I guess the joke is that the snake is like a penis or something. I don't know. It's a really bizarre thing. And so then the narrator makes this really overt parallel between the giant snake and Harry, because they're both trapped in this like box all the time, and they're actually super powerful and feral, and no one understands them, and everybody just treats them like shit. So it seems like there's this Dudley-Harry dichotomy that is now taking the form of like a sort of false toxic masculinity against like whatever, like this like true version of masculinity apparently, although that hasn't really been fleshed out. Or maybe it's like an exterior versus an interior masculinity, where Dudley's is very like surface area, I just am an awful person, and so I project an image of masculinity onto the world, and that is accomplished through sort of violence and like being obsessed with like big snakes and shit, and then also just being like an entitled person who is obsessed with consumption. I mean, we see him eat, where he's eating chocolate, he's consuming, he's getting presents, he's mad that he doesn't get enough presents. So he's like basically like this sort of like excess capitalist monster, whereas like Harry is doing like this sort of subtle consumption where he's, Harry is also eating at the table, but he's doing it very meticulously. And then he's also eating, but he's eating like this lemon thing, and it's only because the parents wanted to save face and pretend that they're not awful people. And so then in like an incredibly heavy-handed metaphor, the snake gets out and makes a beeline for Brazil, because the snake is from Brazil. And I didn't understand this at all. Like, what is that snake going to do? Like, slither to the airport and buy a ticket? I don't think that the snake thought this plan through very well. So, and I guess the idea is that the snake cage like disappeared, and that's the vanishing glass from the title of the chapter. And I guess that this means that like now the constraints are off of Harry, or they're soon to be off of Harry. But so of course Harry gets blamed for the snake fiasco. It's really weird because for a couple that doesn't believe in imagination, and they don't seem to even like understand basic concepts like dreams, or like the distinction between dreams and reality, they are just perfectly willing to believe that Harry is capable of telepathically communicating with a snake and then making a glass case disappear. Their ideology is really bizarre. Like, it makes no sense whatsoever. And then there's also this weird part where Uncle Vernon gets so mad at Harry that he literally collapses, and his aunt, in response to this, gets him a large brandy. And that's really weird. That is really weird to me, because it's all being relayed in this sort of like smooth, charming British affectedness, but it's like, yo, you're straight up living with an alcoholic. Like, this dude is an alcoholic, and there are these just like subtle horrors that are sort of being relayed to you as though like, oh, isn't this cute? Isn't this a cute little fun story? And if we're gonna use that sort of the toxic masculinity and consumption metaphor, I think that this is shaping up to be a story about ideology and about the way that ideology gets masked, which I think is cool in some ways, although I don't know how the The narrator seems to be a lot less critical of this than I would wish. So then the chapter ends with Harry staying in his cupboard, dreaming of greater things, newer pastures, someone to take him away. It's a very, it's like that scene in Star Wars where Luke is like, I just want to, break free. I wish Gregor Clegane would come back on his motorbike and just send me out of here and into wizard school or whatever. I think that this was, it's mostly a not good chapter because I think that the metaphors were pretty heavy-handed. I think that the characterization it's incredibly non-nuanced. It's incredibly black and white. I get that it's a children's book, but I think that even children are capable of understanding the difference between characters and caricatures. And I think that a lot of the sympathy that we feel for Harry is unearned, at least at this point. It's a sort of manufactured sympathy. And I thought for the most part this was a weak chapter, although it went by pretty quickly, and so I'm thankful for that.